The morning sun peeked through the large glass windows of a fancy cafe in downtown Chicago. The warm light fell on polished wooden tables and shiny silverware, creating a cozy atmosphere. Inside, Charles Bennett sat across from his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. For years, this had been their special tradition, a quiet breakfast together every Saturday. It was a time when Charles, a billionaire known for building a massive tech company, could step away from his busy life and focus only on his little girl. Lily was wearing her favorite pink sweater, her curly hair neatly tied back into a ponytail. She giggled as she spread strawberry jam on her toast, occasionally glancing up at her father with admiration. Charles loved these moments more than anything else. Despite his success, which included private jets, expensive cars, and a mansion overlooking Lake Michigan, nothing compared to the joy he felt sitting here with Lily. The cafe buzzed with activity around them. People chatted over steaming cups of coffee. Waiters moved quickly between tables, and the smell of freshly baked pastries filled the air. A young waitress named Grace approached their table to refill their coffee cups. She looked no older than 25, with tired eyes but a warm smile that seemed genuine despite the early hour. Her apron had a small stain on it, probably from rushing around all morning, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. As Grace walked away, Lily tilted her head thoughtfully. She stared at the waitress for a moment before turning to her father. "Dad," she asked innocently, "why does Grace have to work so hard when you don't seem to work at all?" Charles froze mid-bite, caught completely off guard by the question. He lowered his fork slowly and looked at his daughter, unsure how to respond. Lily's big brown eyes were fixed on him, waiting patiently for an answer. She wasn't trying to trick him or challenge him. She simply wanted to understand. "Well, sweetheart," Charles began cautiously, "not everyone has the same opportunities. I've had—" He paused, searching for the right words. But Lily wasn't satisfied yet. "Why not?" she pressed, leaning forward slightly. Her voice was soft but curious. "You always tell me that if someone works hard enough, they can do anything. Is Grace not working hard?" Charles felt a lump form in his throat. He had said those exact words countless times, to employees, during interviews, even to Lily herself. Hard work was the cornerstone of his philosophy. Yet now, faced with his daughter's innocent question, he realized how simplistic that belief sounded. Was it really just about working hard? Or was there something else, something bigger, that separated people like him from people like Grace? He glanced toward the counter where Grace stood, refilling sugar bowls and wiping down surfaces. She moved efficiently, almost mechanically, as though she'd done this routine thousands of times before. There was no hesitation in her movements, just practiced precision. Charles wondered what her life was like outside of this cafe. Did she have dreams? Hopes? What sacrifices did she make every day just to get by? Looking back at Lily, Charles sighed. I don't know, sweetheart," he admitted softly. "Maybe it's more complicated than just working hard." Lily frowned, clearly unsatisfied with his response. She picked up her juice box and sipped it thoughtfully, her brow furrowed as if she were piecing together a puzzle. After a moment, she spoke again. "If it's not fair, why doesn't someone fix it?" Her question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Charles felt a strange mix of emotions, guilt, confusion, and even a hint of frustration. How could he explain such a complex issue to a child? And more importantly, why hadn't he ever asked himself these questions before? For years, Charles had prided himself on being self-made. He came from humble beginnings, growing up in a small house in Detroit with barely enough money to cover groceries. His parents worked tirelessly to provide for him and his siblings, instilling in him the value of determination and perseverance. Those lessons stayed with him throughout his life, driving him to build his empire brick by brick. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of the struggles that shaped him. Success had insulated him, creating a bubble where problems like rent payments, childcare costs, and long hours at low-paying jobs seemed distant and abstract. Now, staring into his daughter's earnest face, Charles realized how detached he had become. Here was Lily, barely 10 years old, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of inequality and privilege. Questions he should have been asking himself long ago. "I don't know, Lily," he repeated, his voice quieter this time. "But maybe we can try to figure it out together." Lily smiled faintly, sensing that her father didn't have all the answers. That was okay with her. She liked solving puzzles, especially when they involved helping others. As she went back to eating her toast, Charles couldn't help but feel a shift inside him. Something about this conversation, and Lily's unwavering curiosity, had planted a seed. Little did he know, that seed would soon grow into something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. That evening, Charles couldn't stop thinking about Lily's question. He sat in his large penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, the city lights twinkling below like tiny stars. The luxurious apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Rachel, his wife, was upstairs reading a book, and Lily had already gone to bed, her small stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. But Charles wasn't ready to relax yet. His mind kept replaying the scene at the cafe, the way Lily had looked at him with those big, curious eyes, the way Grace moved so quickly between tables, and the uncomfortable feeling that came over him when he realized he didn't have a good answer. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old photos, stopping on one from years ago. It was a picture of him standing in front of a tiny office space, wearing a wrinkled shirt and holding a cup of coffee. Back then, he was just starting out, working long hours and barely scraping by. He remembered the stress of paying rent, the late nights spent coding alone, and the constant worry about whether his business would succeed. Those were tough times, but they also felt real in a way his current life didn't always. Rachel walked into the living room, carrying a steaming mug of tea. She noticed Charles staring at his phone with a distant look on his face. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said, sitting down next to him. "What's going on?" "It's Lily," Charles replied, still looking at the photo. "She asked me something today and I didn't know how to answer." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Lily? What did she ask?" Charles hesitated, unsure how to explain. "She asked why Grace, the waitress at the cafe, has to work so hard when I don't seem to work at all." Rachel chuckled softly. "That sounds like our daughter, always asking the big questions." "But it's not funny," Charles said, his tone more serious now. "She made me think about things I haven't thought about in years, like, is success really just about working hard? Or am I just lucky?" Rachel set her mug down and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Maybe it's both," she said gently. "But maybe it's also time you started using your luck to help others." Her words lingered in the air, simple but powerful. Charles nodded slowly, letting them sink in. For the first time in years, he felt a pang of guilt, not for his success, but for forgetting where he came from. He decided right then that he needed to learn more about Grace. If he wanted to understand what Lily was asking, he had to start by understanding people like Grace. The next day, Charles called his assistant, Emily, and asked her to gather some information about the waitress discreetly. Emily was efficient, as always, and within a few hours, she sent him a detailed report. Grace was 24 years old, a single mother raising a 4-year-old son named Ethan. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, one at the cafe and another cleaning offices late at night. Despite her exhausting schedule, she managed to take care of her son and keep their small apartment tidy. She dreamed of going back to school someday to become a nurse, but for now, survival was her top priority. As Charles read through the report, he felt a lump form in his throat. Grace's story reminded him of his own mother, who worked multiple jobs to provide for her family. He remembered how tired she always looked, how she rarely had time to rest or enjoy herself. And yet, she never complained. She simply did what needed to be done. That night, Charles lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He thought about Grace and her son, wondering what their days were like. Did Ethan miss his mom when she was at work? Did Grace ever feel like giving up? Most importantly, How could someone work so hard and still struggle to get ahead? The next morning, Charles woke up early and went for a walk along the lake. The cool breeze helped clear his mind, but the questions remained. By the time he returned home, he knew what he had to do. He dressed casually, in jeans and a sweater, and headed to the cafe, determined to speak with Grace directly. When he arrived, the cafe was bustling with activity. Grace was busy taking orders and delivering plates, her movements quick and precise. Charles waited patiently until there was a lull in the crowd, then approached her table. She looked surprised to see him but greeted him politely. "Hi, Mr. Bennett," she said, recognizing him immediately. "Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you," Charles replied, smiling warmly. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk if you have a moment." Grace hesitated, glancing toward the counter where her manager stood. "I'm kind of in the middle of my shift." "I understand," Charles said quickly. "Whenever you're free. Maybe outside?" Grace nodded, curiosity flickering in her eyes. A few minutes later, she joined him outside the cafe, pulling her apron off as she stepped into the crisp autumn air. They stood near a bench overlooking the street, the sound of cars passing by filling the silence. "So what's this about?" Grace asked, folding her arms across her chest. There was no hostility in her voice, just cautious curiosity. "I wanted to ask you something," Charles began, choosing his words carefully. "About your life, your struggles. I want to understand what it's like for someone like you, to juggle everything you do every day." Grace blinked, clearly taken aback. "Why are you asking me this?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Charles sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because my daughter asked me a question recently and I didn't have a good answer. She wanted to know why people like you have to work so hard while people like me don't seem to work at all. And honestly, I didn't know what to say." Grace studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether he was sincere. Finally, she nodded and gestured toward the bench. "We might as well sit," she said. They sat down side by side and Grace began to share her story. She talked about dropping out of college when she got pregnant with Ethan, about the challenges of finding affordable childcare, and about the constant balancing act between work and parenting. She admitted that some days felt impossible, but she refused to give up because she wanted a better future for her son. As she spoke, Charles listened intently, his heart aching with each word. He realized how much he had underestimated people like Grace, people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, invisible to those who lived in comfort. By the time she finished speaking, tears glistened in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. "Thanks you for listening," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Most people don't even see me." Charles felt a surge of emotion. Guilt, admiration, and resolve all rolled into one. "I should have seen you sooner," he murmured, "and I promise, I'll do better." Grace smiled faintly, unsure what to make of his words. But deep down she felt a spark of hope, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Little did either of them know, this conversation would mark the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would change both their lives forever. The conversation with Grace stayed with Charles long after they parted ways. He couldn't shake the image of her tired but determined face or the weight of her words. For days, he found himself replaying their talk in his mind, especially during moments when he was alone. It wasn't just guilt that haunted him, it was something deeper. He felt a strange mix of admiration for Grace's strength and frustration at the system that forced her to work so hard just to survive. At first, Charles tried to push these thoughts aside. He told himself he had done his part by listening. After all, what more could he do? He wasn't responsible for fixing everyone's problems, but no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, Lily's question kept coming back to him. If it's not fair, why doesn't someone fix it? Those simple words echoed in his head like a challenge, one he couldn't ignore any longer. One evening, as he sat in his home office surrounded by papers and spreadsheets, Charles decided to take action. He opened his laptop and began researching programs that helped single parents pursue education while working. He discovered there were scholarships available, but many required strict qualifications or came with complicated application processes. Others only covered partial tuition, leaving recipients to figure out the rest on their own. It became clear to Charles that while some resources existed, they weren't nearly enough. Rachel walked into the room and noticed him scribbling notes on a legal pad. "What are you working on?" she asked, leaning against the doorway. "I'm trying to figure out how I can help Grace," Charles replied without looking up. "And maybe others like her." Rachel smiled softly. "That's a big goal." "It has to be," Charles said, finally meeting her gaze. "I've spent years building my company and making money, but what good is all of that if I can't use it to make a difference?" Rachel nodded approvingly. "I think that's a great idea, but where do you start?" Charles hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I think the first step is creating something meaningful, something that actually addresses the problem instead of just throwing money at it." Over the next few weeks, Charles threw himself into planning. He reached out to experts in education and social services, asking for advice on how to design a program that would truly help people like Grace. He consulted with financial advisors to ensure the initiative would be sustainable. And most importantly, he kept Grace's story in mind, using it as a guide to shape his vision. Eventually, he settled on an idea: a scholarship fund specifically for single parents who wanted to return to school. The fund wouldn't just cover tuition. It would also provide stipends for childcare, transportation, and other expenses that often prevented people from pursuing higher education. To make the program accessible, Charles planned to simplify the application process and partner with local organizations to spread the word. When the plan was finalized, Charles called Grace to share the news. She sounded surprised and a little skeptical when he explained what he wanted to do. "You're starting a scholarship fund and for people like me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Charles replied firmly. "For people like you. People who work hard, dream big, and deserve a chance to build a better future." Grace was quiet for a moment before responding. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "No one's ever done anything like this for me before." "You don't have to say anything," Charles said gently. "Just promise me you'll apply when the program launches," Grace promised, and they ended the call. But even after hanging up, Charles knew the real work was just beginning. Setting up the scholarship fund required time, effort, and coordination. With multiple organizations, he hired a team to manage the logistics, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Meanwhile, he began reaching out to businesses in Chicago, encouraging them to create flexible job opportunities for single parents. Some companies were hesitant at first, but Charles used his influence to persuade them, emphasizing the importance of supporting families in need. As the weeks passed, Charles started noticing changes, not just in the world around him but within himself. He felt more grounded, more connected to the community he had once taken for granted. Walking through the streets of Chicago, he no longer saw nameless faces rushing past him. Instead, he saw individuals with stories, struggles, and dreams. It was a perspective shift that made him realize how much he had missed over the years. Lily noticed the change in her father, too. One Saturday morning, as they sat together at their usual table in the cafe, she looked up at him curiously. "Dad, you seem different lately," she said. "Did something happen?" Charles chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Maybe I'm just growing up, kiddo." Lily frowned, clearly unsatisfied with his answer. "No, really, you've been smiling, more, and you keep talking about helping people. Did Grace tell you something important?" Charles paused, considering how much to share. Finally, he decided to be honest. "Grace told me a lot of things, sweetheart. She reminded me that life isn't always fair, and sometimes people need help to get ahead, so I decided to do something about it." "What did you do?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Well," Charles began, leaning forward conspiratorially, "I started a scholarship fund for people like Grace, single parents who want to go back to school but can't afford it, and I'm working with companies to give them better jobs too." Lily's face lit up with excitement. "Does that mean Grace gets to go to school?" she asked eagerly. If she wants to, yes, Charles replied, smiling. And maybe someday she'll be able to choose her own path instead of just surviving day by day. That's amazing, Lily exclaimed, clapping her hands. You fixed it, Dad. Charles laughed, touched by her enthusiasm. Well, we're just getting started. There's still a lot of work to do. But deep down, he knew Lily was right. This was just the beginning of something bigger, a ripple effect that could inspire others to take action. By addressing the unfairness Lily had pointed out, he was proving that change was possible. Even small steps could lead to big results. Months later, the scholarship fund officially launched. Grace was one of the first recipients. On her first day of nursing school, she sent Charles a heartfelt thank you note, vowing to pay his kindness forward. Reading her letter, Charles felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. Money and success had brought him comfort, but helping someone else achieve their dreams gave him purpose. And as for Lily, she continued to ask tough questions, always pushing her father to think bigger and do better. Together, they proved that even the smallest voices could spark meaningful change. The scholarship fund Charles created quickly gained attention. News outlets covered the story, praising him for stepping up to help single parents in need. Local TV stations interviewed Grace, who shared her journey and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. Her story resonated with many people: parents juggling jobs and families, students struggling to afford tuition, and even strangers who simply admired her determination. The more people heard about the program, the more applications poured in. Charles was overwhelmed by the response. He had expected interest, but not on this scale. Hundreds of applicants from across Chicago applied, each sharing their own unique challenges and aspirations. Some were young mothers hoping to finish college degrees they had started years ago. Others were fathers working multiple jobs while raising children alone. Each application told a story of resilience, sacrifice, and hope. As Charles reviewed the submissions, he felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was inspired by the courage and ambition of these individuals. On the other hand, he was saddened by the sheer number of people facing such hardships. It was clear that his scholarship fund, though generous, couldn't possibly meet everyone's needs. That realization weighed heavily on him, reminding him how much work still needed to be done. To manage the growing demand, Charles expanded the team overseeing the program. He hired additional staff to review applications, organize workshops, and provide support to recipients. He also partnered with local community centers to offer free tutoring and mentorship programs. These efforts weren't cheap, but Charles didn't hesitate to invest. For the first time in years, he found himself spending money not to build his empire, but to empower others. Grace became an integral part of the initiative. After enrolling in nursing school, she volunteered as an ambassador for the scholarship fund, speaking at events and encouraging others to apply. Her presence added authenticity to the program, showing potential recipients that success was possible, despite difficult circumstances. She often credited Charles for changing her life, but Charles insisted she deserved all the credit herself. "She's the one doing the hard work," he told reporters during an interview. "I just gave her the tools, the rest is up to her." Despite his humility, Charles couldn't deny the impact the program was having, not only on recipients like Grace, but also on himself. Every time he attended a scholarship event or met someone whose life had been transformed, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping others gave him a kind of satisfaction that no business deal ever could. For so long, he had measured success by numbers, profits, revenue, stock prices, but now he saw it differently. Success wasn't about wealth, it was about making a difference. Lily noticed the change in her father too. One Saturday morning, as they sat together at their usual cafe table, she looked up at him thoughtfully. "Dad, do you remember when I asked you why Grace works so hard?" she said. "Of course I do," Charles replied, smiling. That question changed everything. "I'm glad," Lily said earnestly, "because now you're helping lots of people, not just Grace." Charles nodded. You're right, sweetheart. And none of this would have happened if you hadn't asked me that question. Lily grinned proudly, clearly pleased with herself. So does that mean I can ask more questions? Charles laughed. Absolutely. Ask as many as you want. Who knows what we'll learn next? Their conversation was interrupted when Grace arrived at their table. She had recently graduated from her nursing program and landed a job at a nearby hospital. Today, however, she wore casual clothes instead of scrubs, a rare moment of relaxation after months of intense study and training. Hi, Mr. Bennett, Grace said warmly, pulling out a chair to join them. And hello, Lily. Long time no see. Lily beamed at her. Guess what? My dad says I can ask more questions now because I'm good at it. Grace chuckled. Well, I think your questions are pretty amazing. They got me into nursing school after all. Charles leaned back in his seat watching the two interact. It amazed him how much had changed since that first breakfast months ago. Back then, he barely knew Grace's name. Now, she felt like part of their family. Their bond wasn't just built on gratitude. It was rooted in mutual respect and shared goals. As they chatted, Grace shared updates about her new job and her plans to advocate for affordable childcare policies in her community. I've learned so much these past few months, she said. Not just about nursing, but about leadership and giving back. If someone helped me, I should help others too. Charles nodded approvingly. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. Paying it forward, that's the key to real change. Grace smiled. Then consider this my promise. I'll keep fighting for people like me, and I'll make sure they know there's hope, even when things feel impossible. Her words stayed with Charles long after their meeting ended. Over the following weeks, he continued expanding the scholarship fund, adding resources for mental health support and career counseling. He also launched a campaign to raise awareness about systemic barriers faced by low-income families, using his platform to amplify their voices. The more he did, the more he realized how interconnected everyone's struggles were. Fixing one problem often revealed another, creating a ripple effect that required ongoing effort. One evening, as Charles reflected on his journey, Rachel joined him on the balcony of their penthouse. The city lights sparkled below, a reminder of the world beyond their privileged bubble. You've come a long way, she said softly. Do you feel like you're making progress? I think so, Charles replied. But there's still so much to do. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel like it's enough. Rachel placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. It doesn't have to be perfect. What matters is that you're trying. You've already made a huge difference for Grace, for those scholarship recipients, and even for yourself. Charles sighed, looking out at the skyline. I guess I never realized how disconnected I'd become. All those years chasing success. I forgot what really mattered. And now? Rachel prompted. Now I know, Charles said firmly. Success isn't about what you accumulate. It's about what you give back. It's about lifting others up and creating opportunities where there weren't any before. Rachel smiled. Sounds like you found your true purpose. Charles nodded slowly, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt aligned with his values, with his family, and with the world around him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it head on. Little did he know, his efforts were about to inspire others in ways he couldn't have imagined. Across Chicago, businesses began adopting similar initiatives, offering flexible schedules and scholarships to employees in need. Community leaders rallied behind the movement, urging policymakers to address larger issues like affordable housing and healthcare access. What started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something far greater, a collective push toward fairness and equality. And through it all, Charles remained grounded, guided by the wisdom of his daughter and the resilience of people like Grace. Together, they proved that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. Months turned into a year, and the impact of Charles's scholarship fund continued to grow. What had started as a small initiative to help single parents like Grace was now a citywide movement. Local businesses began offering their own programs to support employees with families. Schools partnered with the fund to provide additional tutoring and mentorship for students. Even politicians took notice, proposing policies aimed at easing the financial burdens faced by low-income families. The ripple effect Charles had hoped for was becoming a wave. Grace herself became a symbol of hope. After completing her nursing program, she landed a full-time job at a hospital where she worked tirelessly to care for patients. But her journey didn't stop there. She used her experiences to advocate for others in similar situations, speaking at community events and lobbying for better childcare options. Her story inspired countless people, parents struggling to balance work and family, teenagers unsure if college was worth the cost, and even strangers who simply admired her determination. One evening, Charles attended an awards ceremony honoring individuals who made significant contributions to the community. Grace was among the recipients, receiving a standing ovation as she accepted her award. When it came time for speeches, she stepped up to the microphone, visibly nervous but determined. "I never thought I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "A few years ago, I was working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over my son's head. I didn't have time to dream about the future because I was too busy surviving the present." She paused, glancing toward Charles, who sat in the front row with Lily by his side. "But then someone decided to see me, to really see me, and gave me a chance. That act of kindness changed everything. It showed me that no matter how hard life gets, there's always hope, and now I want to pass that hope on to others." The audience erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. Charles felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched Grace speak. He had known her strength from the beginning, but seeing her stand confidently in front of hundreds of people filled him with pride. She wasn't just a recipient of help anymore. She was a leader, using her voice to inspire change. After the ceremony, Grace approached Charles and Lily, holding her award tightly. "Thank you," she said, her eyes glistening. "This wouldn't have been possible without you." Charles shook his head. "You did this, Grace. All I did was give you the tools. You're the one who built something amazing with them." Grace smiled, hugging Lily briefly before turning back to Charles. "Still, I'll never forget what you've done. For me, for Ethan, and for so many others." As the night went on, Charles reflected on how far they had come. The scholarship fund had grown beyond his wildest expectations, helping dozens of single parents pursue education and better careers. Businesses across Chicago had adopted similar initiatives, creating flexible schedules and offering scholarships to employees in need. Community leaders rallied behind the movement, urging policymakers to address larger issues like affordable housing and healthcare access. What started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something far greater, a collective push toward fairness and equality. But perhaps the most surprising change was within Charles himself. For years, he had measured success by numbers, profits, revenue, stock prices, but now he saw it differently. Success wasn't about wealth, it was about making a difference. Every time he met someone whose life had been transformed by the scholarship fund, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping others gave him a kind of satisfaction that no business deal ever could. Lily noticed the change in her father, too. One Saturday morning, as they sat together at their usual cafe table, she looked up at him thoughtfully. "Dad, do you remember when I asked you why Grace worked so hard?" she said. "Of course I do," Charles replied, smiling. "That question changed everything." "I'm glad," Lily said earnestly, "because now you're helping lots of people, not just Grace." Charles nodded. "You're right, sweetheart. And none of this would have happened if you hadn't asked me that question." Lily grinned proudly, clearly pleased with herself. "So, does that mean I can ask more questions?" Charles laughed. "Absolutely. Ask as many as you want. Who knows what we'll learn next?" Their conversation was interrupted when Grace arrived at their table. She had recently graduated from her nursing program and landed a job at a nearby hospital. Today, however, she wore casual clothes instead of scrubs, a rare moment of relaxation after months of intense study and training. Hi, Mr. Bennett, Grace said warmly, pulling out a chair to join them. And hello, Lily. Long time no see. Lily beamed at her. Guess what? My dad says I can ask more questions now because I'm good at it. Grace chuckled. Well, I think your questions are pretty amazing. They got me into nursing school after all. Charles leaned back in his seat watching the two interact. It amazed him how much had changed since that first breakfast months ago. Back then, he barely knew Grace's name. Now she felt like part of their family. Their bond wasn't just built on gratitude, it was rooted in mutual respect and shared goals. As they chatted, Grace shared updates about her new job and her plans to advocate for affordable childcare policies in her community. I've learned so much these past few months, she said. Not just about nursing, but about leadership and giving back. If someone helped me, I should help others too. Charles nodded approvingly. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. Paying it forward, that's the key to real change. Grace smiled. Then consider this my promise. I'll keep fighting for people like me, and I'll make sure they know there's hope, even when things feel impossible. Her words stayed with Charles long after their meeting ended. Over the following weeks, he continued expanding the scholarship fund, adding resources for mental health support and career counseling. He also launched a campaign to raise awareness about systemic barriers faced by low-income families, using his platform to amplify their voices. The more he did, the more he realized how interconnected everyone's struggles were. Fixing one problem often revealed another, creating a ripple effect that required ongoing effort. One evening, as Charles reflected on his journey, Rachel joined him on the balcony of their penthouse. The city lights sparkled below, a reminder of the world beyond their privileged bubble. You've come a long way, she said softly. Do you feel like you're making progress? I think so, Charles replied. But there's still so much to do. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel like it's enough. Rachel placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. It doesn't have to be perfect. What matters is that you're trying. You've already made a huge difference for Grace, for those scholarship recipients, and even for yourself. Charles sighed, looking out at the skyline. I guess I never realized how disconnected I'd become. All those years chasing success, I forgot what really mattered. And now? Rachel prompted. Now I know, Charles said firmly. Success isn't about what you accumulate. It's about what you give back. It's about lifting others up and creating opportunities where there weren't any before. Rachel smiled. Sounds like you found your true purpose. Charles nodded slowly, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time, in years, he felt aligned, with his values, with his family, and with the world around him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it head-on. Little did he know, his efforts were about to inspire others in ways he couldn't have imagined. Across Chicago, businesses began adopting similar initiatives, offering flexible schedules and scholarships to employees in need. Community leaders rallied behind the movement, urging policymakers to address larger issues like affordable housing and healthcare access. What started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something far greater, a collective push toward fairness and equality. And through it all, Charles remained grounded, guided by the wisdom of his daughter and the resilience of people like Grace. Together, they proved that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change.